Here next, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The pressure mounts on Israel with growing levels of starvation and more military strikes in Gaza. European leaders demand a ceasefire.
I feel the same as the British public, appalled, sickened. I described what I saw yesterday in Parliament as grotesque.
This cannot continue one more minute. There is no military or terrorist objective in continuing this military operation in Gaza.
Our other headlines: the UK announces new sanctions to crack down on people smuggling gangs bringing migrants across the English Channel. The BBC joins wildlife officials on raids after an escaped pet lion attacked people in Pakistan, killing a woman and 2 children. And England face Italy in the semi-finals of the Euros later today as they look to retain their European title. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. The UK Foreign Secretary has suggested that Israel could face further sanctions if it does not agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. David Lammy says he feels appalled and sickened by Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip. The comments come as the Israeli Defense Forces carry out a ground operation targeting Deir al-Balah, where the main hub for humanitarian efforts is actually based. The UN has warned that the last lifelines keeping people alive in Gaza are now collapsing. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
Israel's military is now attacking areas of the Gaza Strip relatively untouched before, where huge numbers of displaced people are sheltering. In nearby Gaza City, the search for food is constant. There isn't enough, and the journeys are long. Today, it was a huge struggle, says Mohammed, until people took pity on us and gave us a bag of flour. We don't have money for transport, we don't have food, we don't have anything to drink. Famine is killing people. From the foreign ministers of 25 mostly European countries, a plea for Israel to comply with international law and stop drip-feeding Gaza with aid.
I described what I saw yesterday in Parliament as grotesque. These are not words that are usually used by a foreign secretary who's attempting to be diplomatic. But when you see innocent children holding out their hand for food, and you see them shot and killed in the way that we have seen in the last few days, of course Britain must call it out.
But for many in the Commons last night, the government's words were not enough.
At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on.
Ahlam is 6 months old, her short life punctuated by constant displacement and now severe acute malnutrition too. It's a similar story with 6-month-old Iman. Her family says there's no food at home and they've been forced to move 6 times during the war. For these children, the UN is only able to offer basic help. Its staff are also on the verge of collapse.
Many are now fainting due to hunger and exhaustion while performing their duties, reporting atrocities or alleviating some of the suffering.
There is talk once again of a ceasefire, but Israel is pushing ahead with a new military operation and doesn't seem inclined to listen to anguished calls coming from abroad. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is here now with me in the studio. Paul, I was listening to David Lammy, an extensive, longer interview earlier in the day, and in a sense he was describing what everybody is seeing. What critics are saying is, what is the action that the government will now actually implement? What is the answer to that?
Yeah, hence that frustration which you heard from many, many members of the House yesterday on all sides. The sense that they'd heard this kind of language before. And yes, it is starker. David Lammy does sound angry. But apart from a handful of quite significant and maybe symbolic actions, the sanctions against 2 members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, the suspension of certain arms deliveries, the view among many MPs is that for some reason the government is hesitating before taking more decisive action, whether that be the implementation of a wider array of sanctions, and there are several that could be applied, and also the recognition of a Palestinian state. Now, on that second move, the government's argument is, and always has been, we're in favour of that. The moment for that will come, but there's no point just doing it for sort of symbolic reasons because we're upset with the Israelis. It needs to be because it'll actually contribute to an improved situation on the ground. Clearly, that argument, which has been made many, many times, is falling on sort of harder ears now than it was before.
I was reading, one person just described all the discussions around a ceasefire as almost a distraction when we're seeing these things on the ground every single day. I suppose the absolutely critical voice in all of this is the White House and Donald Trump. and their support, which shows no sign of the sort of concern and anger that we're hearing from Europeans. How integral to actually any progress is a position change from Donald Trump?
Totally fundamental. I mean, 25 foreign ministers from mostly European countries can sound off all they want. It is not going to have any practical impact whatsoever unless the United States is somehow on board with that. And at the moment, the US seems almost invisible. Steve Witkoff, the envoy, seems to have more or less vanished from the scene. I mean, yes, there are negotiations going on, and there is talk once again of a ceasefire. We've been, there many, many times. David Lammy is of the view that once the Knesset goes into its summer recess in a few days' time, the political pressures on Benjamin Netanyahu will be less than they were before, allowing him perhaps to take bolder action. Maybe. There are some in Israel who essentially argue that the military's job is pretty much done there, and that Benjamin Netanyahu could declare victory if he wants. But he doesn't seem at the moment inclined to do it. And that's this new operation in Deir al-Balah, which was always going to happen, being the last place that hadn't really been visited thoroughly, to put it that way, by the army. That was always going to happen, and it may be that the view in Israel is that has to complete before ceasefire talks can really go anywhere. But yes, without the United States really being seen and heard to be pushing for this, and there is no sign of that, it's hard to see it happening.
Paul Adams, thanks so much for that analysis. Let's continue with this. Jan Egeland is the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, whose Garda headquarters are in Deir al-Balah. Now, thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Jan Egeland. UNRWA, we were hearing from yesterday, saying the people in Gaza are now entering the death phase. That's how they described it. Is that an assessment that you share as well?
Absolutely. I have 65 colleagues on the ground. Nearly all of them are trusted Palestinian aid workers. They've been with us now for a generation. They have fled now 10, 12, 15 times themselves with their families. They have nothing left. They are themselves starving. And then they've been denied by Israel all relief supplies possible in 145 days. So we have hundreds of truckloads waiting to come into the starving Gazan families. We've been denied that. It happened once before in a very similar manner by the Assad regime in Syria, which was also bombing besieged areas that they were starving. And the West had no problem in finding a host of crippling sanctions against Syria. So far, they've even provided the arms to this carnage. So I don't think it's very difficult to find tools and ways to pressure the Israeli military machine. Look at what they did to Syria. They could do the same here.
I'll come back to that point in a moment, but you mentioned how your organisation have got trucks ready to go in. The UN have said that they have warehouses full of supplies in Egypt. In terms of the basic morality of having all of that absolutely on the doorstep, what do you think?
Well, I think it is deliberate starvation. There is no other way to describe it. And that's a war crime according to the Geneva Conventions, which came out of the Second World War and the Holocaust. So these are war crimes. Everybody condemned the horror and the terror of the 7th of October. The people dying massively in the tens of thousands are completely innocent women and children. And we've said so since late October, nearly 1.5 years ago. I'm glad now, finally, some Western capitals are waking up. This is a chronicle of an announced mass murder. And it should have ended long before, but since we are in the final, time has run out. It's not running out, it has run out. We have to have the border open tomorrow, and there has to be a massive pressure on Washington, but also on Berlin, that did not join this declaration of the 25 nations. It has to come now, really. This is a time for action.
In terms of those diplomatic moves, you will have seen what was issued yesterday. What was your assessment of the communique that was issued by those leaders?
Well, I think it was great that it was 25 nations joining, and others have come on afterwards. But with Washington not there, not even Berlin there, it's very clear that the 25 have to address Washington. They have to address Berlin, and they have to tell Israel, you cannot continue to sing and dance the European Song Contest and compete in the European championships and as if it's business as usual. This is the destruction of a civilization in Gaza. What they've asked now of late is us and everybody else in Deir Balla, but also in 93% of the rest of Gaza, to cram together what Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, calls a concentration camp. And in that place, we're all supposed to cram together. It's like the UK being told, you have to go all to Wales. And we're going to destroy all of the cities, all of the civilization, which was the UK. This is a similar thing, just in a smaller place.
Jan Egeland, we have to leave it there, but we are grateful for your time. Thanks for joining us here on BBC News. We're going to take a short break. When we're back, we'll have more of our headline stories around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Welcome back to Verified Live here on BBC News. Now, the former boss of one of the UK's biggest trade unions, Len McCluskey, enjoyed private jet flights and football tickets arranged by the firm who built a multi-million-pound hotel for the union he led, Unite. That's according to an internal Unite report seen by the BBC. It also says the hotel's builders overcharged the union by £30 million, and the property is now worth at least £70 million less than was actually spent on it. Well, let's go straight to Westminster and to our political investigations correspondent, Joe Pike. And Joe, tell us a little more about what has been established here then.
Well, the important background, Matthew, is that Len McCluskey used to be a very powerful person in Labour politics, leading Unite, which was the biggest union, one of the biggest unions in the country, and certainly was Labour's biggest donor. It is no longer Labour's biggest donor. He was also a big supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. While he was General Secretary, while he was in charge, the union decided to build this hotel and conference centre in Birmingham. It was part a financial investment, part a venue for them to hold meetings, but it went, as you say, vastly over budget. Now, I've got hold of this internal report which says that Mr McCluskey enjoyed private jet flights and football tickets arranged by Flanagan Group, who got the contract to build this very expensive hotel. Now, Mr McCluskey's lawyers say that he paid for his travel in full, and he always remembers paying for his football tickets. Flanagan Group haven't responded to our repeated requests for comment. Some other key headlines from this report. They say that McCluskey overruled advice from staff and lawyers in giving the contract to Flanagan Group, who he has previously described as friends. There was no competitive tendering process, and Flanagan Group overcharged, as you said at the start, Matthew, Unite by £30 million. Now, in response, Mr McCluskey said he wasn't involved in this tendering process. He doesn't remember signing any contract. And also, he denies overruling any staff or lawyers. But there are obviously serious questions to ask about what happened, about governance, and about ultimately the use of members' money. Matthew, we're talking about workers in factories and in defence companies and in the NHS, and some would argue their money has been wasted here.
Joe, you gave us the reaction from Len McCluskey himself, but give me an idea of the wider reaction there has been to people you've talked to.
Well, Sharon Graham is probably the key person we should mention. She took over from McCluskey in 2001, and she's ordered since then 5 internal reports into what has happened. Here's a taste of what she said to me earlier.
I was astounded. I could feel the pit of my stomach drop. There's no way to gloss this up. There's no way to pretend that actually it was a whoopsie-daisy moment. There's either two things that have gone on here. With £70 million adrift, it's either rank incompetence or it's something else.
How did this happen, though? You were working at the union at the time in a reasonably senior position. How did you not spot anything?
Well, Norm, because we weren't sort of in those meetings. That's why we've got to make sure that the governance of the union is strengthened.
Well, Matthew, the hotel is now open, but the saga over the millions of pounds spent on it is not. And the Serious Fraud Office is now investigating.
Joe Pike there at Westminster. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. Now, gang leaders, corrupt police officers and companies selling small boat equipment for channel crossings are among those that could be sanctioned as part of attempts to curb people smuggling gangs to the UK. The first sanctions as part of this new regime are due to come into force tomorrow. Here's our correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
The last government pledged to stop the boats. This one promises to smash the gangs. But the boats keep coming. And the government's looking for new ways to crack down on the business of people smuggling. Tomorrow, the first sanctions will be imposed under new powers, going after those responsible for bringing people on dangerous, illegal journeys to the UK. The initial wave is expected to include a couple of dozen names.
We will go after the smugglers, we will go after their enablers, we will go after those who sell engines, we will go after those who smuggle people, we will bear down on them. And of course it will have effect when we're talking about a 10 billion industry. Of course it can have effect if we freeze their accounts and issue travel bans.
More than 20,000 migrants have crossed the Channel since the start of this year, a big increase on the same period 12 months ago, though numbers in 2024 were down from 2 years earlier. Among the targets of the first new sanctions will be people supplying the small boats, selling fake passports and facilitating payments, as well as gang leaders. They'll have any assets here frozen, be banned from travelling to the UK, and it'll be illegal for British businesses to deal with them. But questions have been asked about how easy sanctions will be to enforce and what impact they'll have. And they won't be a quick fix.
I would say to the government that enforcement has a role to play. Sanctions like those being announced today have a role to play, but there are no magic bullets. And actually, there is no simple solution. This is a complex issue, and the government needs to recognise that. It needs to look at what can be done to support people who are fleeing wars to stay in neighbouring countries.
The government says criminal gangs are preying on the hopes of the vulnerable. It wants to name and shame those making themselves rich in what is a multi-billion-pound global trade that shows no sign of stopping. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Well, let's speak to the senior researcher at the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, Peter Walsh. Peter, thank you for joining us on the programme. What do you think are the likely impacts of a sanctions package like this?
Well, the reality is there's a lack of high-quality evidence on what the likely impacts of the sanctions that have been announced are. And there's also, at this point in time, a lack of operational detail that would allow us to evaluate likely success or failure. But there are two big challenges with enforcing sanctions in this space. The first is that smugglers operate in countries often far beyond UK jurisdiction and in countries with which we have limited to no law enforcement cooperation, countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Syria. So that is a major challenge. It does require an international solution, but very close international coordination that will often be beyond our reach. The second challenge is the financial backbone of smuggling networks is based on this system of using middlemen, the Hawala system, and that has proven notoriously difficult to regulate, and that underpins the finances of these operations, and it operates outside of the formal banking system. So that is a second really difficult challenge.
We've seen recent deals with France and Germany, but in terms of numbers, they are back at record levels. Why are we seeing the numbers at these levels, do you think?
It's very difficult to disentangle the whole range of factors that could be responsible. There are some plausible explanations. One is to do with conditions in countries of origin. There are reports on the ground that situations there have become more chaotic, more conducive to these kinds of refugee migration flows. We're talking about countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Eritrea, Syria, Yemen, places that suffer under political persecution or civil or ethnic conflict of various kinds. So we have that driving factor. We also have, of course, the smugglers who are at the heart of this. They've become increasingly professionalized in recent years, well-resourced. They've always been highly adaptable. They've been in this business for a long time. They're efficient at it. There is a third set of factors, which is the pull factors. You know, why do people want to come to the UK? Why not just claim asylum in France? And the same kinds of issues recur, the presence of family members, the English language, and now there is emerging evidence of a Brexit effect, that there are individuals in Calais who have perhaps claimed asylum in an EU country, been refused, and they understand that if they can get to the UK, because we're no longer a part of the European Union, we will have to process their claim.
That's an interesting final point. A really brief final question. We keep hearing the phrase "smash the gangs" since the Labour government came in over a year ago. What is your assessment of the progress made on that?
I think it's probably too early to say. Clearly, the numbers are going in the wrong direction, but the core of this smash the gangs policy is actually in legislation that's before Parliament as we speak. It's the Border Security Bill. We're expecting that to become law later this year, and then we'll see those much vaunted counter-terror powers in operation, and then we'll be in a position to see just how effective they are.
Peter Walsh, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Now, a crackdown against people keeping big cats as illegal pets has been launched in the province of Punjab in Pakistan. It comes after one lion escaped in the city of Lahore, attacking a woman and 2 children. The BBC's Pakistan correspondent Azadeh Mashiri joined wildlife officials on one of their raids.
Caged and abandoned. Cubs rescued. One by one. Officials worry their parents are hidden away in unsafe conditions.
People breed lions and then sell the cubs to others who keep them as pets on rooftops. So these breeding farms are the root of the problem.
The man responsible is missing, leaving his caretaker holding the bag. Public pressure has led to nearly daily raids. After this video triggered a public uproar, a pet lion escaping and attacking a woman and 2 children in Lahore. One breeder has been given 3 months to build bigger cages and comply with guidelines.
What about their welfare, their well-being?
We have a veterinary doctor. He visits like every after 2-3 days. They are happy, I think. They're eating, they're breeding.
How can you tell they're happy?
Because they come to us, they want to play with us, and they don't show aggression. Yeah.
What about this one? Ooh!
This lion is aggressive.
Aggressive?
Yeah.
Big cats are extremely popular in Punjab. Symbol of the ruling PMLN party, supporters defy laws and occasionally take them to rallies.
Now, as these raids continue, there are still people who are openly selling lions and cubs. And we managed to get in touch with one man in a busy neighborhood. These are the cubs over here that he has bred.
More people watch others with lions on social media and get tempted to buy them, especially since 2015.
There are so many big cats in Punjab, Officials worry there isn't enough space in public zoos to relocate them. As for the cubs they rescued earlier, they're receiving medical checks before they're released into the main park. Officials say soon, more big cats will join them. Azadeh Mashiri, BBC News, Islamabad.
Before we break, let me bring you the latest comments on Gaza from the UN Secretary-General, who has just said that malnourishment is soaring and starvation is knocking on every door, describing the situation now as a horror show. He said we are now seeing the last gasp of a humanitarian system built on humanitarian principles. That system is being denied the conditions to function, denied the space to deliver, denied the safety to save lives. Here on the programme in the next couple of minutes, we'll play you an interview I've just done with Spain's foreign minister. He was one of those co-signatories to that letter yesterday. That is coming up here on BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. The pressure mounts on Israel with growing levels of starvation in Gaza and more military strikes. European leaders demand a ceasefire.
This cannot continue one more minute. There is no military or terrorist objective in continuing this military operation in Gaza.
A report finds that the former union boss Len McCluskey took flights on private jets arranged by a building firm. The BBC speaks to a victim of Jeffrey Epstein who's called on President Trump to release files related to the convicted paedophile. And England face Italy in the semi-finals of the Euros later today as they look to retain their European title. Well, more on all of those stories coming up. Let's cross and catch up with more of the sports news of the day. Rebecca is here, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matthew. As you mentioned there, England face Italy this evening in the first of the Women's Euro semi-finals in Switzerland. The Lionesses have now reached the semi-final stage of a major tournament for the 6th time in a row as they look to overcome the Italians, who are appearing in their first semi-final in 28 years. Jane Dougal is in Geneva and she sent us this report.
England will be the favourites ahead of this semi-final match against Italy here in Geneva, but their manager Sarina Wiegman says that she will not be complacent and that any team that manages to get to a semi-final of a major tournament needs to be respected. And that is certainly true of Italy, because they put Norway out in the quarter-final stage of this tournament, which no one expected them to do, and they did it with a dramatic 90th minute winner from their captain Cristiana Girelli, who has been phenomenal for them in this competition. Now, as you can imagine, the majority of the pre-match press conferences have been dominated by talk of the racist abuse that has been suffered by England defender Jess Carter, and also the decision taken by the England squad to not take a knee before tonight's match. Now, during the Italian press conference, they were asked if they would stand in solidarity with England. And defender Cecilia Salvi said that yes, they would be, and that there would be a gesture of some kind before kick-off, but that the two captains still had to discuss what that would be. Of course, England will not be taking the knee, but they will hope not to be taking penalties either, following that incredible penalty shootout against Sweden, following normal time and extra time as well. The manager, Sarina Wiegman, was asked if they'd been practicing penalties. She said yes for hours and hours, but hopefully it won't come to that.
Let's get an update from the cricket at Chesterley Street, where England's women are taking on India in the third and final one-day international. India won the toss and chose to bat, and they're currently 197 for 3. At the minute, the series stands at 1-1 after England's victory in a rain-affected match at Lord's on Saturday. This is their last official fixture in the 50-over format before their World Cup campaign begins in October against South Africa in India. England's men are also in action, and they face India tomorrow in the 4th test at Old Trafford, where victory would see them win the series. After bowling 44 overs in the last test, Captain Ben Stokes said he had to spend a couple of days in bed recovering, but he's prepared to do the same again this week if required.
I was true to my word about what I said at the end of the game about being in bed for a couple of days. I did do that. I felt like I was in a long distance relationship with my family because I hardly seen them being at home. So, yeah, if the situation requires it again, then yeah, I'll obviously do what I need to do. And I think we've gone all 5 days and all 3 tests so far, so it just proves that the quality of cricket's been outstanding so far. You know, 2 teams going toe to toe, and you know, not very much separating us at the moment. So look, it's been a great series so far. Still got 2 big games to go, and obviously one of those 2 starts tomorrow. So yeah, it's been good to be a part of so far.
The British and Irish Lions beat First Nations and Pacifica 24 points to 19 in their warm-up match ahead of this weekend's 2nd test against Australia. The Lions ran in 4 tries in total as Jamie Osborne and Darcy Graham scored early to put them 14-0 ahead before Graham went off injured and the hosts levelled at 14-all at half-time. Osborne added his 2nd try and a 3rd for the Lions before Duhan van der Merwe got their 4th to give them the narrow victory. Well, that's all for now from the BBC Sports Centre. It's back to you, Matthew.
Rebecca, thanks very much. Now, in the last few minutes, the UN Secretary General has said malnourishment is soaring and starvation is knocking on every day on the door in Gaza, describing the situation as a horror show. Well, it comes as international criticism of Israel has been intensifying. Yesterday, 28 nations issued a statement calling for an immediate end to the war and condemned Israel over what it described as inhumane killing of Gaza's civilians seeking aid. Well, Spain was one of the signatories, and before today's programme, their foreign minister told me why.
For three reasons. First of all, because we want to denounce the terrible and inhumane situation in Gaza. Secondly, because we want to make the difference to end the war and to release all hostages. And thirdly, because we have to name things and we have to tell Israel that we cannot continue business as usual with this terrible situation. We are talking about a killing that has no end, whether are kids, women, men, civilians. We are talking about displacement of people. We are talking about preventing humanitarian aid from being properly delivered. And I think that the scale of horror is going out of any proportion when we see people being killed while they are queuing up to try to get food. Once again, this cannot continue one more minute. There is no military or terrorist objective in continuing this military operation in Gaza.
Israel says those people who've signed this letter are out of touch. Isn't the reality that they are not listening to you? You are an irrelevance.
Not at all. They might not be listening to us, but the fact that they answer so quickly, that shows that they know that what we are saying and what we are pointing is the reality. And anyhow, we are not going to stop denouncing what are terrible breaches of humanitarian law, of human rights, defending the United Nations Charter and the basic principles, and even defending mere humanity. So
sure,
for
but
all
these are just
reasons,
words. Where are the actions?
We are doing actions. Spain is doing actions. We have a list of people sanctions that are violent settlers. We have an arms embargo, and we are not selling weapons to Israel or allowing ships with cargoes of weapons towards Israel to stop in our ports. We try to influence with our voice and our weight European Union. We have joined the South African claim in the ICJ. We are continuing financing both UNRWA and the Palestinian National Authority. So, of course, we have actions, a lot of them, and we will continue until the war is over.
I said that you were irrelevant. To be relevant, don't you actually have to consider, for example, the trade agreement between the EU and Israel? Former ambassadors have been calling for months now for that to be suspended. Why hasn't it been, if there is real pressure to be applied?
I put three measures at the table. One, it was the suspension of the Council of Association between the EU and Israel. The second one, it was an arms embargo, not selling weapons to Israel. And the third one, it was to increasing the list of people that are being sanctioned to anyone that wants to really spoil the two-state solution. In order to do many of them, we need unanimity or qualified majority. It's not there, but Spain has been at the beginning saying things in which we were alone or with 2 or 3 countries, and little by little more countries were adding until we had unanimity.
Sure, but you talk as if
this will be the situation.
As if there's time, and there clearly isn't. Let me just read to you something that David Lammy, another of the co-signatories, wrote only yesterday about Russia and Ukraine. He said, "Together we are hammering Putin's oil revenue, blocking billions from his war chest. Only through maximum economic pressure will we achieve a lasting peace." Why is that logic not being applied to Israel when it comes to the EU trade deal?
That's a question for those states that don't want to join the different positions that Spain is putting at the table. If it was to us, we would be talking with exactly the same principles for exactly the same reasons, both in Ukraine and in Gaza. Bilaterally, Spain does it. We say the same thing. We enforce the same measures at the bilateral level, whether it's with Ukraine or whether it's in Gaza. And I wish, and I do the best that we can, so European Union does it. What we have to understand in Europe, and that this is not taking sides, is always taking the side of international law, international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians, whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza.
We've heard that phrase used from international capitals for decades, that never again in terms of man-made horrors. We are watching this man-made horror play out in real time. Do you get any sense that there will be a point where the EU across the board says enough?
I hope so. And I've seen how the debate in Brussels has been evolving in the last year, and how positions that once again were held by Spain with 3-4 more countries suddenly was 15, 16, until we got unanimity. And I'm sure that this level of horror that we are seeing is going to gather that unanimity, because if Europe doesn't speak up on behalf of international law, human rights, and the most basic principle of humanity, no one else will do it. All those principles,
yes,
we are the father and mother of them. We have to defend them.
A final question then. If there are more strikes, more people dying from starvation, even this time next week, what should European capitals actually do? What is the next step that is more than just more words?
For me, it's very clear. The suspension of the Council of Association between European Union and Israel, the arms embargo, and of course, enlarging the list of people being sanctioned. That's just basically implementing our own legislation, European Union legislation, that tell us what we have to do when there are huge violations of human rights.
Well, that was Spain's Foreign Minister talking to me a little earlier today. Now, one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims and a key witness in the Ghislaine Maxwell sex trafficking trial is calling on Donald Trump to release information in the government's possession related to the sex offender. Donald Trump has faced a huge backlash from some of his most loyal supporters for not releasing the Epstein files. Annie Farmer and her sister Maria made the earliest known reports of abuse by Epstein to the NYPD and the FBI in 1996. Our New York correspondent Neda Tawfik asked her what she thought of the debate surrounding the release of the so-called Epstein client list.
It's exhausting to have this, cycle happen over and over, where the case gets so much attention and then it feels like often that's not really followed by much action. I was not surprised that Trump's team made this announcement. I have never felt that Trump was someone that would be very supportive of justice for Epstein's victims, just given that he's a sexual predator and that he had this close association with Epstein. But of course, when there are all these people saying that there will be more attention given and there will be more accountability, you still hope that that might be true. I think really the case has been politicized so much, and it's hard not to feel used in that process.
Well, Neda Tawfik did that interview, and she told us here at the BBC a little more about the concerns Annie Farmer had about the administration's handling of all of this.
Annie mentioned a number of what she called missteps by the administration, first and foremost by promising so much about transparency and accountability with the Epstein files, and then making what she sees as a U-turn, saying there's nothing to see here. She also said the release of that 11 hours of prison surveillance footage from the moments before Epstein apparently died by suicide, that also raised some questions for her. She says the Department of Justice hasn't responded to whether the footage was edited or was definitely raw, as they have suggested. So she had questions about that and said it raised more questions in the end. But chiefly, Maureen Comey, Sumi, is a prosecutor who went after Epstein and also secured the conviction for Ghislaine Maxwell. She worked hand in hand with Annie Farmer, who was a key witness in that case. Now, the Trump administration fired Maureen Comey without an explanation. And Annie says specifically at this time, with so much focus around the Epstein case and the victims, that she found that incredibly distressing. She spoke with other victims. They want answers into why she was fired.
Well, that was Ned Torvik talking a little earlier. In response to that interview, the White House called the allegations old fake news and said that President Trump had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his Florida club for being, quote, a creep. Let's turn to Bangladesh, because the number of people killed when a fighter plane crashed into a school on Monday has risen to 31, with more than 160 people injured. Most of the dead were children. The plane came down while students were preparing to go home at the end of the day in the capital, Dhaka. The country's interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, has promised an investigation into the cause of the crash. He said the thoughts of the whole country were with the victims' families. Well, our BBC Bengali reporter has been speaking with teachers and parents at the site, some of whom are still looking for their children.
We are nearby the crash site where hundreds of students are protesting and demanding fair and transparent investigation about the plane crash. They also have blocked the law advisor and education advisor along with the press secretary and other high officials in academic building inside the campus compound. What we have seen in the morning, the advisor arrived in the crash site. They have visited. That time the students start protesting and demanding 6 points, that the government should compensate the victim family, and also there should be a fair investigation, and the actual number should be disclosed, because the protesters accusing that the government is not disclosing the actual number. So this is their accusation, but the government said they are not hiding any numbers, but government also said that they are going to compensate every single family who are affected, and victim families will get the compensation and the victim will get free treatment. In the morning, what we have seen, there was activity, search and rescue activity in the crash site, but after 12 o'clock, there was no activity. It was totally cordoned, and the student was there, and the protest still going on.
Straight to breaking news, breaking health news. Let me tell you that we've just been told that the BMA, the British Medical Association, says planned strikes by resident doctors in England will go ahead. The strike is set to last 5 days. It is set to start on Friday. The announcement follows talks which began with the government, with Wes Streeting last Thursday. But the news just coming to us from our health editor, Hugh Pym, saying that those planned strikes by resident doctors in England will go ahead. That is just broken. We will bring you more details. We'll speak to Hugh here on the programme in the next little while. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Welcome back to Verified Live here on BBC News. Let's talk football now. And England's women are preparing for their Euro 2025 semi-final in Geneva. The Lionesses will face Italy tonight, although preparations have been slightly overshadowed by the racial abuse suffered by the defender Jess Carter. Well, let's speak live to Izzy Gilligan, who's a football journalist, an England fan. And Izzy, welcome here to the programme. Your initial thoughts on what we are expecting tonight. How tight is this game going to be between England and Italy?
Yeah, so I think most people would agree that England are probably heavier favourites going into this match. In the last few meetings against Italy, England have won all of them, and they have a bit of a higher ranking than Italy. However, I think it would be silly to underestimate this Italian side. They've made themselves extremely difficult to beat across this competition, and they have shown the same kind of determination that the England side have shown, kind of waiting till the last minute and being able to win these games in the dying moments. So I think it will hopefully be a really exciting game, and hopefully one that's full of tactics, and looking forward to seeing lots of goals.
Well, certainly the quarterfinals were. I'll come back to Italy in a moment, but psychologically for England, after doing that sort of Houdini act against Sweden, does that help in their minds psychologically, or create a doubt that if a side does what Sweden does, then perhaps they may be in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll probably give the Lionesses a bit of a boost, because they've not had such a convincing campaign this time around as we saw in Euro 2022, where they were just prolifically winning every single match. But I think being able to take that game down to the wire and win it on penalties will just fill every player with confidence, specifically Hannah Hampton as well in goal. I think she was maybe not so confident going into the tournament, and being able to make such huge saves in a penalty shootout like that, I think they'll all be brimming with confidence heading into tonight's game.
Yeah, it wasn't just her. I mean, when you look at Leah Williamson, Lucy Bronze, Chloe Kelly, there were startling performances on the pitch. But who do England have to watch out for when it comes to Italy, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that the main player that most people are probably talking about is Italy's captain, Cristina Girelli. She is centre forward. She leads the team from the front, and she scored a brace in their quarter-final against Norway. She's seriously experienced with 122 caps for Italy. She brings a lot to that side and is able to score goals from tight areas, and she's good in across the box. And she linked up really well with Sofia Cantore. They've played together at Juventus for the last few seasons, and she kind of came to life in that last game with 2 assists to Girelli's 2 goals. So that as a combination will be something that England will be looking out for, and something to watch on the pitch.
A final thought about the whole of the tournament, because it has been great actually watching it. It underlines, I suppose, the speed of progress in the women's games. When you look at it being televised, you look at the crowd capacity, you actually look at the quality of the football.
Yeah, 100%. And the fact that there's been such tight results and we've seen upsets just shows how far the women's game has come since Euro 2022. The fact that these teams have come closer and closer together in quality, and the fact that these stadiums in Switzerland are so full. Yes, they might be smaller capacity stadiums, but they're still breaking attendance records. Each round, the cumulative attendance is the highest we've ever seen before. So it's super exciting, and I think it will just keep building, and it's all going to, there's going to be so many people watching tonight. It was record viewing figures on the BBC for the last game. So I think it'll be pretty exciting going forward.
Quick final thought, who do you expect to actually win? And would you assume, after what we saw, they've perhaps been practising a little more about their penalties?
Yeah, you'd hope that England have been practising their penalties for sure. We saw a couple of amazing goals. I think Lucy Bronze's was 102 kilometres an hour, which is just amazing. And I'm sure that those players that missed them will have been working on it. But obviously, it's amazing to stand up and put your hand up for a penalty either way. So I think if we get to that scenario, we might see a slightly different look at what England brings to it.
Izzy, thanks so much for joining us. We'll perhaps talk again after tonight's semi-final. Thanks so much for your time. Well, the Euros isn't the only major tournament reaching the final stages today. It is the semi-finals of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations, AFCON. Both semi-finals will kick off a little later today in Morocco. First up in Casablanca, the reigning champions South Africa take on Nigeria, who've won 9 out of the last 12 tournaments since the first competition back in 1998. Then later on this evening, the host nation Morocco will try to get to the final 3 years after losing out to South Africa. They're up against Ghana, who haven't made a final in almost 20 years. Well, our reporter Celestine Caronet previews the action from Casablanca.
Nigeria came into this tournament. A lot of people were not talking about them, and they were saying that the champions might not get to number 10, but they demolished Zambia 5-0 to get to the semi-finals. Zambia that had Barbara Banda and Rachel Kundananji, two of women's football's biggest stars currently. And so I think there's a lot of expectation that Nigeria will be the favorites when they come up against the defending champions, South Africa. Now, South Africa have only had a day's rest, and they had to travel from north of the country into Casablanca for this semi-final, and they've been talking about the fatigue may have caught on, but they say it will not be an excuse. Now there's expectation that the match in Morocco, in Rabat rather, will be packed. It will be a packed stadium at the Olympic Stadium when Morocco take on Ghana. Both teams have never won the Women's Africa Cup of Nations, and Morocco are hoping that their fans can lift them to a second consecutive final.
Well, a great evening of football ahead. I have more of the day's headlines in a moment. More on that breaking development that doctors in England will go ahead with their strike action for Friday. More on that in just a moment. Live from London, this is BBC News. The pressure mounts on Israel with growing levels of starvation in Gaza and more military strikes. European leaders demand a ceasefire.
I feel the same as the British public, appalled, sickened. I described what I saw yesterday in Parliament as grotesque.
This cannot continue one more minute. There is no military or terrorist objective in continuing this military operation in Gaza.
Breaking news, the British Medical Association says a planned strike by resident doctors in England will go ahead this week. And staying in the UK, an internal report says that the former Unite union boss Len McCluskey took flights on private jets arranged by a company building a multi-million-pound hotel for the union. New sanctions to crack down on people smuggling gangs bringing migrants across the English Channel. And England face Italy in the semi-finals of the Euros later today as they look to retain their European title. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. The UK Foreign Secretary has suggested that Israel could face further sanctions if it does not agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. David Lammy says he feels appalled and sickened by Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip. The comments came as the Israeli Defense Forces carried out ground operations targeting an area which is close to the main hub for humanitarian efforts. The UN has warned that the last lifelines keeping people alive in Gaza are now collapsing. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
Israel's military is now attacking areas of the Gaza Strip relatively untouched before, where huge numbers of displaced people are sheltering. In nearby Gaza City, the search for food is constant. There isn't enough, and the journeys are long. Today it was a huge struggle, says Mohammed, until people took pity on us and gave us a bag of flour. We don't have money for transport, we don't have food, we don't have anything to drink. Famine is killing people. From the foreign ministers of 25 mostly European countries, a plea for Israel to comply with international law and stop drip feeding Gaza with aid.
I described what I saw yesterday in Parliament as grotesque. These are not words that are usually used by a foreign secretary who's attempting to be diplomatic. But when you see innocent children holding out their hand for food, and you see them shot and killed in the way that we have seen in the last few days, of course Britain must call it out.
But for many in the Commons last night, the government's words were not enough.
At a time when we've got daily lynchings and expulsions on the West Bank, dozens being murdered as they beg for aid, I'm just beyond words, really, at his inaction and, frankly, complicity by inaction at what is going on.
Ahlam is 6 months old, her short life punctuated by constant displacement and now severe acute malnutrition too. It's a similar story with 6-month-old Iman. Her family says there's no food at home and they've been forced to move 6 times during the war. For these children, the UN is only able to offer basic help. Its staff are also on the verge of collapse.
Many are now fainting due to hunger and exhaustion while performing their duties, reporting atrocities or alleviating some of the suffering.
There is talk once again of a ceasefire, but Israel is pushing ahead with a new military operation and doesn't seem inclined to listen to anguished calls coming from abroad. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Well, a little earlier I spoke to Jan Egeland, who's the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He actually described to me how his team were coping on the ground.
I have 65 colleagues on the ground. Nearly all of them are trusted Palestinian aid workers. They've been with us now for a generation. They have fled now 10, 12, 15 times themselves with their families. They have nothing left. They are themselves starving. And then they've been denied by Israel all relief supplies possible in 145 days. So we have hundreds of truckloads waiting to come into the starving Gazan families. We've been denied that. It happened once before in a very similar manner by the Assad regime in Syria, which was also bombing besieged areas that they were starving. And the West had no problem in finding a host of crippling sanctions against Syria. So far, they've even provided the arms to this carnage. So I don't think it's very difficult to find tools and ways to pressure the Israeli military machine. Look at what they did to Syria. They could do the same here.
I'll come back to that point in a moment, but you mentioned how your organisation have got trucks ready to go in. The UN have said that they have warehouses full of supplies in Egypt. In terms of the basic morality of having all of that absolutely on the doorstep, what do you think?
Well, I think it is deliberate starvation. There is no other way to describe it. And that's a war crime according to the Geneva Conventions, which came out of the Second World War and the Holocaust. So these are war crimes. Everybody condemned the horror and the terror of the 7th of October. The people dying massively in the tens of thousands are completely innocent women and children. And we've said so since late October, nearly 1.5 years ago. I'm glad now, finally, some Western capitals are waking up. This is a chronicle of an announced mass murder. And it should have ended long before, but since we are in the final, time has run out. It's not running out, it has run out. We have to have the border open tomorrow, and there has to be a massive pressure on Washington, but also on Berlin, that did not join this declaration of the 25 nations. It has to come now, really. This is a time for action.
In terms of those diplomatic moves, you will have seen what was issued yesterday. What was your assessment of the communiqué that was issued by those leaders?
Well, I think it was great that there was 25 nations joining, and others have come on afterwards. But with Washington not there, not even Berlin there, it's very clear that the 25 have to address Washington. They have to address Berlin, and they have to tell Israel, you cannot continue to sing and dance the European Song Contest and compete in the European championships and as if it's business as usual. This is the destruction of a civilization in Gaza. What they've asked now of late is us and everybody else in Deir Bala, but also in 93% of the rest of Gaza, to cram together what Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, calls a concentration camp. And in that place, we're all supposed to cram together. It's like the UK being told, you have to go all to Wales. And we're going to destroy all of the cities, all of the civilization, which was the UK. This is a similar thing, just in a smaller place.
Well, that was Jan Egeland talking to me a little earlier. We were looking at what the UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, was saying to the BBC at length earlier in the day. And I've also been talking to Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, and I was asking him, was it any clearer listening to the Foreign Secretary what concrete new action was being considered?
It is starker. David Lammy does sound angry. But apart from a handful of quite significant and maybe symbolic actions, the sanctions against 2 members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, the suspension of certain arms deliveries, the view among many MPs is that for some reason the government is hesitating before taking more decisive action, whether that be the implementation of a wider array of sanctions, and there are several that could be applied, and also the recognition of a Palestinian state. Now, on that second move, the government's argument is, and always has been, we're in favour of that. The moment for that will come, but there's no point just doing it for sort of symbolic reasons because we're upset with the Israelis. It needs to be because it'll actually contribute to an improved situation on the ground. Clearly, that argument, which has been made many, many times, is falling on sort of harder ears now than it was before.
Well, that was Paul Adams. As we've been discussing, that 28-nation statement yesterday called for an immediate end to the war. Now, Spain was one of those signatories, and before today's programme actually started, their foreign minister explained to me why they signed.
For three reasons. First of all, because we want to denounce the terrible and inhumane situation in Gaza. Secondly, because we want to make the difference to end the war and to release all hostages. And thirdly, because we have to name things and we have to tell Israel that we cannot continue business as usual with this terrible situation. We are talking about a killing that has no end, whether are kids, women, men, civilians. We are talking about displacement of people. We are talking about preventing humanitarian aid from being properly delivered. And I think that the scale of horror is going out of any proportion when we see people being killed while they are queuing up to try to get food. Once again, this cannot continue one more minute. There is no military or terrorist objective in continuing this military operation in Gaza.
Israel says those people who've signed this letter are out of touch. Isn't the reality that they are not listening to you? You are an irrelevance.
Not at all. They might not be listening to us, but the fact that they answer so quickly, that shows that they know that what we are saying and what we are pointing is the reality. And anyhow, we are not going to stop denouncing what are terrible breaches of humanitarian law, of human rights, defending the United Nations Charter and the basic principles, and even defending mere humanity. So
sure,
for
but
all
these are just
reasons,
words. Where are the actions?
We are doing actions. Spain is doing actions. We have a list of people sanctions that are violent settlers. We have an arms embargo, and we are not selling weapons to Israel or allowing ships with cargoes of weapons towards Israel to stop in our ports. We try to influence with our voice and our weight European Union. We have joined the South African claim in the ICJ. We are continuing financing both UNRWA and the Palestinian National Authority. So, of course, we have actions, a lot of them, and we will continue until the war is over.
Final question then. If there are more strikes, more people dying from starvation, even this time next week, what should European capitals actually do? What is the next step that is more than just more words?
For me, it's very clear. The suspension of the Council of Association between European Union and Israel, the arms embargo, and of course, enlarging the list of people being sanctioned. That's just basically implementing our own legislation, European Union legislation that tell us what we have to do when there are huge violations of human rights.
That was Spain's Foreign Minister talking to me a little earlier in the day. Before we break, I just want to take you live to the White House, show you the pictures there because the honour guard all in place, because in the next few minutes, the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos is due at the White House to meet with Donald Trump. He is the first Southeast Asian leader to visit the US in Donald Trump's second term. The Philippines aiming to strengthen economic, defence ties with the US and, of course, China prominent in both the countries' thinking. And of course, the Philippines president also hoping to get a better, more favourable trade deal, because in terms of tariffs, 20%, that is the figure that is due to come into effect on August the 1st. So lots to talk about now. The usual form of this is that the president arrives, there's handshakes, and then within quick time, usually there's a brief news conference in the Oval Office, and all sorts of questions then get fired at the two leaders. So that is what I'm expecting. All of that we will see live here on BBC News as and when it happens. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Let's return to that breaking news of the last few minutes, the news that the BMA has announced that the planned strike by junior doctors, known as resident doctors in England, will go ahead this week. Let's talk to Hugh Pym, the BBC's health editor, has just joined me in the studio. And Hugh, tell us more.
Well, Matthew, the Doctors' Union, the British Medical Association, had announced a strike in England from this Friday, 25th of July, for 5 days. Last Thursday, talks began with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, and officials, and there were some positive noises being made. Now, the disputes over pay, but also working conditions for resident doctors, they were known as junior doctors. It's all around whether they're moved around the country too much, paying for their exam fees, a whole lot of problems that these doctors have experienced, but their basic demand was more money. Now, there were optimistic noises at the end of last week, and the talks continued through till last night. Wes Streeting then wrote to the BMA saying, please postpone your strike and we can carry on the talks. But just in the last hour or so, the BMA has announced that this strike will go ahead because they haven't heard enough in terms of an offer from Mr. Streeting to call it off.
You said in the middle part of that answer there were promising soundings as a result of those talks. I thought that Wes Streeting had said on pay, because of the amounts that were being talked about, there would be no movement there. But he was looking at all those other areas to try to come to some sort of agreement.
Yes.
So presumably even in those other areas, there has not been as much movement as the union wants.
Well, the BMA say that they didn't get anything that was tangible enough to make them confident that these talks could move forward. We haven't heard yet from Mr. Streeting himself or his officials. I'm sure they will argue that they put a lot of different things on the table. And with pay, you had headline pay, and he'd made clear that their overall pay packet, he couldn't afford to pay them any more this year. They've had 5.4% awarded on average, on top of 22% over the last 2 years. And it was pretty clear, he said he didn't think he could promise any more for the next couple of years. But there are these other issues that might affect pay packets if you cut out exam fees and travel costs, and if there's some deal on pensions with lower contributions, that might have boosted pay packets. But that doesn't seem to have got anywhere at all. The strike will go ahead, and NHS leaders in England have warned of considerable disruption, with many, many thousands of operations and appointments cancelled over those 5 days.
Hugh, I'll come back to that point in a moment, but we have just got a soundbite from the union, the BMA, so let's just put that onto the screen and hear what they're saying.
We went into these talks in good faith. We were willing to hear what Mr. Streeting had to offer. He knew what it would take to get us to call off the strikes, which was a credible offer, and unfortunately we haven't received one.
So what happens next?
So the committee has met this afternoon and discussed the letter we received from Mr. Streeting, and they've voted unanimously to continue with our strike dates as announced. Obviously, our door is always open for Mr. Streeting to come forth with an offer. None of us want to go out on strike. I'm a paediatric doctor. I work with children and families, and I'd much rather be at work. But we simply need Mr. Streeting to act and present us with a credible offer.
Well, Hugh, here we are on the Tuesday. These strikes, unless there's movement, are going to go ahead on Friday. Talk me through contingencies that may or may not be in place.
Well, in previous strikes in England, hospitals have basically cancelled everything deemed to be non-urgent, planned treatment and so on, so they could redeploy more senior doctors, consultants and other specialist doctors to emergency care. Now, a bit of a row's blown up over that because NHS England, who manage the system overall from the centre, have told hospitals don't cancel if you possibly can, because a cancelled operation can mean considerable distress for a patient. But the BMA, one of their leaders you heard from just there, Dr. Melissa Ryan, is saying if you don't cancel these non-urgent operations, then the doctors who are in will be spread too thinly and it'll affect patient safety. So there's quite a lot of bad feeling running ahead of this planned strike, which will begin in England on Friday.
Hugh, thank you for taking us through all of the latest, and that phrase that is being used is that the door is still open. We are Tuesday, the strikes start Friday, so I suspect plenty more focus on this story in the next couple of days. Now, let's turn to another story that we've seen develop in the last couple of hours, because the former boss of one of the UK's biggest trade unions, Len McCluskey, enjoyed private jet flights and football tickets arranged by the firm who built a multi-million-pound hotel for the union he led, and that union was Unite. That's according to an internal report seen by the BBC. It also says the hotel's builders overcharged the union by £30 million, and the property is now worth at least £70 million less than was actually spent on it. Here's our political correspondent, Joe Pike.
Len McCluskey used to be a very powerful person in Labour politics, leading Unite, which was the biggest union, one of the biggest unions in the country, and certainly was Labour's biggest donor. It is no longer Labour's biggest donor. He was also a big supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. While he was General Secretary, while he was in charge, the union decided to build this hotel and conference centre in Birmingham. It was part a financial investment, part a venue for them to hold meetings, but it went, as you say, vastly over budget. Now, I've got hold of this internal report which says that Mr McCluskey enjoyed private jet flights and football tickets arranged by Flanagan Group, who got the contract to build this very expensive hotel. Now, Mr McCluskey's lawyers say that he paid for his travel in full, and he always remembers paying for his football tickets. Flanagan Group haven't responded to our repeated requests for comment. Some other key headlines from this report. They say that McCluskey overruled advice from staff and lawyers in giving the contract to Flanagan Group, who he has previously described as friends. There was no competitive tendering process, and Flanagan Group overcharged, as you said at the start, Matthew, Unite by £30 million. Now, in response, Mr McCluskey said he wasn't involved in this tendering process. He doesn't remember signing any contract, and also he denies overruling any staff or lawyers. But there are obviously serious questions to ask about what happened, about governance, and about ultimately the use of members' money. Matthew, we're talking about workers in factories and in defence companies and in the NHS, and some would argue their money has been wasted here.
Joe, you gave us the reaction from Len McCluskey himself, but give me an idea of the wider reaction there has been to people you've talked to.
Well, Sharon Graham is probably the key person we should mention. She took over from McCluskey in 2001, and she's ordered since then 5 internal reports into what has happened. Here's a taste of what she said to me earlier.
I was astounded. I could feel the pit of my stomach drop. There's no way to gloss this up. There's no way to pretend that actually it was a whoopsie-daisy moment. There's either two things that have gone on here. With £70 million adrift, it's either rank incompetence or it's something else.
How did this happen, though? You were working at the union at the time in a reasonably senior position. How did you not spot anything?
Well, Norm, it's because we weren't sort of in those meetings. That's why we've got to make sure that the governance of the union is strengthened.
Well, Matthew, the hotel is now open, but the saga over the millions of pounds spent on it is not. And the Serious Fraud Office is now...
Joe Pike. Now, let's turn to Bangladesh, because the number of people killed when a fighter plane crashed into a school yesterday has risen to 31, with another 160 people injured. Most of the dead were children. The plane came down while students were preparing to go home at the end of a school day in the capital, Dhaka. The country's interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, has promised an investigation into the cause of the crash. He said the thoughts of the whole country were with the victims' families. Well, our BBC Bengali reporter has been speaking with teachers and parents at the site, and some of whom are still looking for their children.
We are nearby the crash site where hundreds of students are protesting and demanding fair and transparent investigation about the plane crash. They also have blocked the law advisor and education advisor along with the press secretary and other high officials in academic building inside the campus compound. What we have seen in the morning, the advisor arrived in the crash site. They have visited. That time the students start protesting and demanding 6 points, that the government should compensate the victim family, and also there should be a fair investigation, and the actual number should be disclosed, because the protesters accusing that the government is not disclosing the actual number. So this is their accusation, but the government said they are not hiding any numbers, but government also said that they are going to compensate every single family who are affected, and victim families will get the compensation and the victim will get free treatment. In the morning, what we have seen, there was activity, search and rescue activity in the crash site, but after 12 o'clock, there was no activity. It was totally cordoned, and the student was there, and the protest still going on.
That was the latest there from Bangladesh. Before we take a break, I want to take you back to the White House because we're still waiting for the President of the Philippines to arrive. We're about 10 minutes behind schedule, so it is likely to happen in the next few moments. Ferdinand Marcos due to meet with Donald Trump. He's the first Southeast Asian leader to visit the US in Trump's second term. Lots to talk about. Obviously, tariffs. There is a 20% tariff due to come in on August the 1st. But of course, defense ties, economic ties will absolutely dominate with conversations around deterring an assertive China. That's what US officials are saying. So we're keeping an eye on the White House. We'll bring you the very latest from there. I'll be back in about 15 minutes' time. Next up, it's time for all the business of the day, and Ben is here in just a moment or two.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
Surging debt, UK government borrowing rises more than expected in June as speculation grows that taxes will have to rise. More tariff trouble, car giant General Motors books $1 billion hit from President Trump's auto levies, and it warns of worse to come. And US brain drain, a record number of American students apply to study in the UK. So is Trump's war on woke a win for British universities? Hello, welcome. This is Business Today. I'm Ben Thompson. Now we're going to start here in the UK, where there's been some more bad news for government finances. As UK government borrowing rose by more than expected last month following a big jump in debt interest payments. Borrowing was £20.7 billion in June. That, of course, is the difference between what it spends and what it makes in tax income. It came in at that. It's up by £6.6 billion from the same month last year. Well, these latest figures come amid growing expectations of tax rises in the autumn budget. Economist Callum Pickering says the government has few choices left.
The government faces a choice heading into the autumn budget of which taxes to raise. Remember, the government has promised not to raise employee national insurance, income taxes and VAT, but that accounts for about 2/3 of the tax base. And then you've got about 15, 20 other taxes, which are small buckets. That's where the government will be focusing its attention. But economically speaking, and given the political constraints, it may actually be that the government is forced to bite the bullet, raise one of the three, break the promise, but at least get fiscal policy back on side.
Yeah, it's sort of talked itself into a corner here, hasn't it, by making that pledge in its manifesto not to raise personal taxes on working people, but putting a lot of faith in growing the economy. It's something we've heard a lot about. That's just not happening, and so the debt interest payments are mounting, the economy is not growing. It leaves Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, with very few options.
That's the thing. It's not that the economy is not growing, it's growing more slowly than the OBR had anticipated. And because of worries in financial markets is about the sustainability of UK finances, interest costs are rising ahead of expectations. So the government just needs to get its arms around this. The one thing I would say to viewers is that if the government is forced to raise taxes in a significant way and that jars the economy, it would probably be a disinflationary tax increase. People would be spending less because of higher taxes. And then the Bank of England would probably be able to go a little bit faster into next year. So I actually wouldn't be too pessimistic heading into next year. It's just, I would think about the economy in a different way. I think the Bank of England could then start to do some heavy lifting, given that it's got so much room still to cut interest rates.
Well, one big thing here in the UK on the government spending list will be more cash for the Sizewell C nuclear power plant. Well, the government's announced it's now likely to cost £38 billion to build. That's nearly double the original estimate. Well, the project will be jointly funded by a number of international investors, but the government, it will be the largest shareholder. It'll have a 45% stake. Jack, he told me why these reactors are needed.
The appeal of nuclear is it's low carbon when it's running and that it's always on. So it creates what they call baseload energy supply. But as you say, 38 billion is the big number announced today. The government basically gave the political go-ahead for this weeks ago, but what we didn't know is exactly how much it would cost and who was going to own what and contribute what, and they published that today. As you say, the government will retain the biggest shareholding of 45%, a number of private investors, including Centrica, a Canadian investment fund, a couple of others. But the cost of £38 billion sounds whopping, but the original estimate was back in 2020 and based on even earlier kind of prices, and a lot of that is to do with the inflation we've seen, some quite big inflation, let's remember, since 2020. But it actually could be even higher than that because they are actually raising a combination of debt and equity up to £45 billion. So they're putting in a little contingency, but, and this is quite an important but, they are putting a mechanism in place so that if the contractors and the investors can bring this in on budget or under budget and on time, they will actually get a bit more money, and they will be protected from some of the downside if it runs over that, which is one of the conditions for some of them putting money in. So it's a bit of a moving target how much this is going to cost. As you all know, nuclear projects have a nasty habit of overrunning on time and on budget. For example, Hinkley Point, of which this is almost an exact copy, was originally back in 2009 estimated at £18 billion. It's now going to, the latest estimate is £47.5 billion. Again, some inflation in there. But that is the experience of nuclear projects. Now, they say with plants in France and plants in Somerset and now this new one, they've learned a lot of the lessons, so we'll try and bring this in on time. But they say that actually the economic boost will be great because you'll create 10,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and when built in about 10 years' time, it will provide enough power for 6 million homes.
Simon Jack there, our business editor. Now, costs are continuing to mount for UK consumers, it seems. Grocery prices in the UK have increased at their fastest pace in 18 months amid growing concern from shoppers about the rising cost of living. Well, according to new figures, grocery price inflation accelerated by 5.2% in the last month. That's up from 4.7% in the month before. It's actually the highest level since January of 2024. Well, the data tells us that rising prices could add an average of £275 to shoppers' annual grocery spending. Well, Andrew Walker is at World Panel. They are behind the numbers, and I asked him why prices just keep on going up.
Yes, as you say, it's the highest increase in inflation we've seen since the beginning of 2024, which was sort of the tail end of that period of really high inflation we saw through 2023. And I think it's a combination of rising costs of raw goods, rising production costs, and just the costs for retailers of running their businesses, which are coming through for consumers.
But what so many people will find quite jarring is that, you know, they're paying more for stuff like this, but we also then get big announcements from the big retailers about how much profit they're making. So they're doing okay, but consumers are feeling the pain.
Yeah, well, I think it remains a hugely competitive market for everyone involved. So retailers know that if they're not offering the value that consumers are looking for, there's another store down the road or around the corner that they can take their business to. So what we've seen retailers respond with, as anyone who's walked through the door of a UK retailer in the last 12 months will have seen, is more promotional activity, and particularly activity focused around loyalty, so more offers for consumers when they arrive at the shelves.
But at the same time, they're also kind of looking at what they can offer in those stores, lots more own brand products, things like that, as people maybe trade down to save a few pence here and there.
Yeah, exactly. So the choices people have, and as you said, that the inflation that we're talking about now of over 5% means that people would, if they don't change their choices, have to spend almost £300 more per year. So the choices people have are they can buy less product, they can put fewer items in their baskets, they can choose a cheaper retailer, or most commonly what we actually see is people choosing cheaper items, which is choosing a shop's own brand instead of a branded item. And in recent months, we've started again to see those shops' own brand products grow faster than the branded products.
The very latest there on rising prices for UK consumers. Let's take you to the White House and to the Oval Office. There you will see President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines talking with US President Trump there, talking about all sorts of things, including, quite clearly, a trade deal too. Let's just have a listen to what they're saying.
Get along with anybody. They didn't know. Honestly, they didn't know what they were doing. But we have some fantastic military relationships with the Philippines, and that's been reinstituted. And Pete, I would say that you couldn't be happier, right, with the relationship. So I just want to say it's an honor to have you. We're going to talk about trade today, and we're very close to finishing a trade deal, big trade deal actually. And we do a lot of business with you. It's a lot of income coming in for both groups. But I was surprised to see the kind of numbers. They're very big, and they're going to get bigger under what we're doing and what we're proposing. And I just want to thank you for being with us. It's a great honor. You and your representative. It's really a great honor. We have a big announcement. AstraZeneca, the big drug company, is going to spend $50 billion, just announced $50 billion in the United States in order to build various places all over the country, big manufacturing plants, pharmaceutical plants all over the country. So that's an honor. And he said they did that because of the election and because of the fact that the tariffs are placed. So they're building their facilities in New York. $50 billion, that's a big investment. And it's going to be a very good investment. I have no doubt about it. So thank you to AstraZeneca. And with that, I'd like to have you say a few words, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Of course, we're all very happy to be here to once again reaffirm the very strong ties between the Philippines and the United States, ties that go back over 100 years. And considering the context in which we live these days, especially in my part of the world, this has evolved into as important a relationship as is possible to have. We must remember that the United States is our only treaty partner in the Philippines, and that has stood us in good stead over the years, certainly through the Second World War, and the cultural memory of all Filipinos, down to even the school children, is that our strongest, closest, most reliable ally has always been the United States. And that is something that we value, that we are grateful for, and that we will continue to foster as we go on. With the leadership of President Trump, I am very confident that we will be able to achieve that. I think it is worthwhile to remember that it was President Trump who, in his first term, characterized the relationship between the Philippines and the United States as ironclad. And that has been necessarily the case since that time that you made that statement, sir. And it is something that the Philippines will always hold close to its heart. Thank you once again, and we are honored, and it is our great pleasure to be here and to visit with the President of the United States. Thank you, sir.
It's my great honor. Any questions, please?
Mr. President.
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. President, do you think that Fed Chair Jerome Powell should resign?
I think he's done a bad job, but he's going to be out pretty soon anyway. In eight months, he'll be out. But I call him too late. He's too late all the time. He should have lowered interest rates many times. Europe lowered their rate 10 times. We lowered ours none. And it's causing a problem for people that want to buy a home. Look, our economy is so strong now, we're blowing through everything. We're setting records. You know that. You see that. And whether it's the Philippines or anyone else, we're setting records at levels that nobody's ever seen before. But you know what? People aren't able to buy a house because this guy is a numbskull. He keeps the rates too high, and probably doing it for political reasons. The only time I remember him cutting rates, I mean, he cut the rates just before the election to try and help Kamala or whoever he was trying to help. He probably didn't know. And he's building a building. He's $2.7 billion. They have a $900 million overrun. What is that? And that was given by Biden. That was another Biden deal. And this guy's building this building that's severely overrun. And what does he need the building for? What does he need? He needs space for more people. So they did a big study the other day, and they called all of the great intellects and the great economists and all of the great everything. And it was 71, and only 2 got it right. Me and another gentleman that happens to be very smart. 69 people got it wrong, and the Fed got it wrong, more wrong than anybody. And you know, he has these think tanks, and they build buildings for people that think. And it's really not thinking. It's a little bit of combination of thinking, but it's something you sort of have or you don't have. They don't. The job he's done is just terrible. He ought to raise interest rates. You know, we should be at 1%. We should be leading the world. Instead, we're paying 4%. And if you look at what that means, that's over $1 trillion in interest that we have to pay. That with the striking of a pen, we would be saving more than $1 trillion. Is that right, Scott?
Yes,
do you have anything to say about it?
Yes, sir. I called yesterday and this morning for the Fed to do a big internal investigation to understand not their monetary policy, but everything else. The Fed has had big mission creep, and that's where a lot of the spending's going. That's why they're building these new or refurbishing these buildings. And I think they got to stay in their lane. And I think that based on the way they cut rates last fall, they should be cutting rates now.
It's inconceivable, I know the Fed very well, that they can be spending $2.7 billion to build a building. They don't do anything. They just, I mean, it's the greatest job. You show up one day, a half a day, you make a little speech, the economy's doing well, the economy's not doing well, we're going to raise interest. And he's got it wrong. That's why I call him too late, T-O-O, too late. And it's really too bad. But it is affecting people that want to buy houses, and that shouldn't happen.
And Mr. President,
And you know, he should lower them. Those rates should be 3 points lower. That's what they should be, 3 points lower, maybe more than that.
I would like to ask both of you
Yes.
one question. Mr. President Marcos, next year, Philippines is going to be the rotating chair of ASEAN. I wonder how do you plan to balance your relationship between the United States and China? And for President Trump, Kremlin yesterday said if you are going to Beijing in September, they wouldn't rule out a meeting between you and President Putin. Is such a meeting possible? And how soon do you plan to visit China?
Well, we have a lot of meetings possible. President Xi has invited me to China, and we'll probably be doing that in the not too distant future, a little bit out, but not too distant. And I've been invited by a lot of people, and we'll make those decisions pretty soon. Please.
Well, as you say, we are chairing ASEAN for 2026. There is no need, in a sense, to balance, as you characterize as, to balance our relationship within the United States and China, simply because our foreign policy is an independent one, and we are essentially concerned with the defense of our territory and the exercise of our sovereign rights. Now, whether we do this not alone, we need to do this with our partners. And again, our strongest partner has always been the United States. But of course, we are trying to form coalitions and multilateral relations so that those like-minded nations who share the same values as we do, who hew to international law, most specifically the UNCLOS, present that position very clearly to anyone who has intentions of unilaterally changing the world order, and that is how we are guided in that.
And I don't mind if he gets along with China, because we're getting along with China very well. We have a very good relationship. In fact, the magnets, which is a little complex piece of material, but the magnets are coming out, very well. They're sending them in record numbers. We're getting along with China very well, and I don't mind if the president dealt with China. If that's meant, because I think he has to do what's right for his country. I've always said, make the Philippines great again. Do whatever you need to do, but you're dealing with China wouldn't bother me at all.
No, well, no, it is something that we have to do in any case, and certainly that.
Mr. President, do you support the Justice Department seeking an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell? Did you urge the Attorney General to see her?
I don't know anything about it. They're going to what? Meet her?
Your Deputy Attorney General has reached out to Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney asking for a new interview.
Yeah, I don't know about it, but I think it's something that sounds appropriate to do, yeah.
Do you have any concern that your Deputy Attorney General, as your former attorney, would be conducting the interview, given...
No, I have no concern. He's a very talented person. He's very smart. I didn't know that they were going to do it. I don't really follow that too much. It's sort of a witch hunt, just a continuation of the witch hunt. The witch hunt that you should be talking about is they caught President Obama absolutely cold, Tulsi Gabbard. What they did to this country in 2016, starting in 2016, but going up to 2020 in the election. They tried to rig the election, and they got caught. And there should be very severe consequences for that. When we caught Hillary Clinton, I said, you know what? Let's not go too far here. It's the ex-wife of a president, and I thought it was sort of terrible. And I let her off the hook, and I'm very happy I did. But it's time to start, after what they did to me, and whether it's right or wrong, it's time to go after people. Obama's been caught directly. So people say, oh, a group. It's not a group. It's Obama. His orders are on the paper. The papers are signed. The papers came right out of their office. They sent everything to be highly classified. Well, the highly classified's been released, and what they did in 2016 and in 2020 is very criminal. It's criminal at the highest level. So that's really the things you should be talking about. I know nothing about the other, but I think it's appropriate that they do go.
May I ask you about that, Mr. President?
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard has submitted a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. From your perspective, who should the DOJ target as part of their investigation? What specific figures in the Obama administration?
Well, based on what I read, and I read pretty much what you read, it would be President Obama. He started it. And Biden was there with him, and Comey was there, and Clapper, the whole group was there. Brennan, they were all there in a room, right here. This was the room. This is much more beautiful than it was then, but that's okay. I have nice pictures up. They came out of the vaults. They were in there for 100 years. This is much more beautiful. We have the Declaration of Independence now in the room, which wasn't here. I guess people didn't feel too good about putting it here, but I do. But you know what? If you look at those papers, they have them stone cold, and it was President Obama. It wasn't lots of people all over the place. It was them too. But the leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? And except for the fact that he gets shielded by the press for his entire life, that's the one they look. He's guilty. It's not a question. You know, I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of. They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined, even in other countries. You've seen some pretty rough countries. This man has seen some pretty rough countries, but you've never seen anything like that. And we have all of the documents. And from what Tulsi told me, she's got thousands of additional documents coming. So President Obama, it was his concept, his idea, but he also got it from crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill. Hillary Clinton and her group, the Democrats, spent $12 million to Christopher Steele to write up a report that was a total fake report. Took 2 years to figure that out, but it came out that it was a total fake report. It was made up fiction. And they used that. Now, the one thing they weren't able to do was to, and probably the only thing I respect about the press in years is the press refused to write it before the election. They refused to put it in. The Steele report was a disaster. All lies, all fabrication, all admitted, an admitted fraud. She paid $12 million, and the Democrats, for that report to a wise guy named Christopher Steele. He wrote a phony report, and they wanted to get that report in before the election. And I'll tell you what, I talk about all the time, the fake news, how bad it is. But in this case, they wouldn't do it. They saw it, they read it, and they said, we don't believe it. And it was only after, substantially, like a month and a half after the election, that it got printed, and it was a big wisp. It was just like a bang of nothing, because the election had ended. If that report had gotten published by the New York Times or somebody, and I respect the Times for maybe only this, because they're crooked as you can be. They're a terrible paper, a crooked, corrupt paper. But for this one moment, they said, this is bullshit, we can't put this in. And neither could any other paper. Wall Street Journal's a lousy paper, very, very dishonest paper. As you see, I'm suing them for a lot of money because they do things very badly. It's got a nice name, but it's really, in my opinion, it's a terrible paper. And it can be corrupt. But just so you know, they didn't take the Steele report. It was the dossier. Remember the famous dossier? I called it the fake news dossier. The news wouldn't publish it. And I'm amazed. They had 2.5 months. It was finished. 2.5 months. That was supposed to be what was going to happen. And it got published a couple of months after the election. And frankly, nobody cared too much about it. But that was a big thing. No, we caught Hillary Clinton. We caught Barack Hussein Obama. They're the ones, and then you have many, many people under them. Susan Rice, they're all there. The names are all there. And I guess they figured they're going to put this in classified information, and nobody will ever see it again, but it doesn't work that way. And it's the most unbelievable thing I think I've ever read. So you ought to take a look at that and stop talking about nonsense, because this is big stuff. Never has a thing like this happened in the history of our country. And by the way, it morphed into the 2020 race. And the 2020 race was rigged, and it was a rigged election. And because it was rigged, we have millions of people in our country. We had inflation. We solved the inflation problem. But millions and millions of people came into our country because of that. And people that shouldn't have been, people from gangs and from jails and from mental institutions, people that we don't want in our country, and people that we're getting out, dangerous people. 11,888 murderers, many of them, 50%, more than 50%, murdered more than one person. I hate to say this with such a distinguished guest, but you know, they asked me a question. I got to answer the question. No, Barack Hussein Obama is the ringleader. Hillary Clinton was right there with him, and so was Sleepy Joe Biden, and so were the rest of them. Comey, Clapper, the whole group. And they tried to rig an election, and they got caught. And then they did rig the election in 2020. And then because I knew I won that election by a lot, I did it a third time, and I won in a landslide. Every swing state won the popular vote. But I won that all the same way in 2020. And look at the damage that was caused.
How crucial is the ammunition hub that the U.S. plans to build in Subic and the Luzon corridor, considering that these will be built in areas that hosts strategic ports as well as military air bases?
You're talking ammunition?
Yes, the U.S. House Congressional Committee on Appropriations approved a budget.
Well, it's very important. Otherwise, we wouldn't have approved it.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's very important. Otherwise, we wouldn't. We need ammunition. We're going to end up in a few months, we'll have more ammunition than any country has ever had. We're going to have more missiles than any country has ever had. We're going to have all the speedy missiles. We'll have the speedy ones, the slow ones, the accurate ones, the ones that are slightly less accurate. We have everything. But we will have more ammunition than any country has ever had. It's very important to me. Okay. Go ahead, please, Red.
Sir, when you say that you're close to making a trade deal, what gaps remain? And for President Marcos, sir, I was just wondering, do you not think that perhaps the Philippines hosting U.S. missile systems could be considered escalatory by China, especially because they can strike dangerously by China? Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be with this gentleman. You know, I've known him, and I've known his family, actually, but I've known him. And I assume you're from the Philippines? Are you from the Philippines?
Yes, sir.
That's good. You're very lucky to be from the Philippines, right? It's a great place. But we're going to have a very good relationship. I mean, I know you had some problems with another president, and it was not your fault. It was the president's fault. And the country was maybe tilting toward China, but we untilted it very, very quickly. But you know, you had a country that was tilting toward China for a period of time, and I just don't think that would have been good for you. You can deal with China, you should deal with China, but when I got elected, everything changed, and they came right back to us. Say it again? Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Oh, Mr. President, I just wanted to piggyback off the
Sorry, I
housing.
have a question to President Marcos.
Yes. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
It was about whether having U.S. missiles hosted in the Philippines could be considered escalatory by China.
All of what we consider part of the modernization of the Philippine military is really as a response to the circumstances that surround the situation around the South China Sea, and now what we used to refer to as Asia Pacific, which we have expanded now to the Indo-Pacific. And if we would certainly, like in any kind of military spending, we would wish that it wasn't necessary, but it is. And so that is what we are doing. And as an adjunct to the question about the ammunition production, this is actually, the United States is assisting the Philippines in what we call our self-reliance defense program, which is to allow us to be self-reliant and to be able to stand our own 2 feet, whatever the circumstances that occur in the future. And that the reason that we have encouraged more interaction with the United States is because it is, again, it is necessary. And it is not just with the United States. It is with all our neighboring countries and even countries as far afield as the Scandinavian countries, the EU. And so this is an ongoing process. And again, I will stress the point that we do this because we feel it is necessary.
And don't forget, just as tantamount to what you're asking, the Philippines were loaded up with ISIS and a lot of terrorists, and they were at a very, very dangerous point. And during my administration, we went in and we wiped them out, working with the Philippines, but we wiped them out. But if we didn't go in, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know who would be your president right now. But we spent a lot of time and a lot of talent on going into the Philippines and wiping out terrorists. They had a tremendous problem during my administration. And we cleaned it up, we got them out, and now you really have a good, solid country again.
I believe so, yes.
How can you make it more
Mr. President, I want to follow up on a housing question.
Yeah.
We've got no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. How important is it we have no tax on home sales, capital gains, to unleash the housing market?
Well, we're thinking about that, but would also unleash it just by lowering the interest rates. If the Fed would lower the rates, we wouldn't even have to do that. But we are thinking about no tax on capital gains on houses. And I'm very impressed that you asked that question because nobody knew that.
Well,
how did you find that out? That's very.
I wonder why there's somebody very close to
There's
that.
a leaker. There's a leaker.
I've also got a question. I find it a very interesting world that we know more about two people at a Coldplay concert just hours after that viral video than we know of Thomas Crooks 1 year after attempting to assassinate you. What is holding back the investigation on Thomas Crooks?
Well, they've reported to me and they've told me things, and they really say they haven't found anything that was abnormal. I would say this: the Secret Service was very brave because they were right there and they jumped on me. They made a mistake. They should have had somebody on that roof, and they should have had communication with the local police, who also, I mean, they did a very good job, but they made some mistakes, and we have a whole different group of people now. I don't think anything can happen, but I think we have the best people anywhere in the world right now, and I think they've learned. And they went into him very, in great detail. They gave me the whole thing, and what can I do? They say that it was just a nut job that was looking to do this, and I spoke with the FBI, the new FBI. I spoke to the FBI. If it was the old FBI, I wouldn't have believed a thing they said, because the old FBI under Comey was crooked as hell. He was one of the most crooked. Everybody should read the Horowitz report. Unfortunately, Bill Barr didn't use it. But the Horowitz report, not appointed by me, it was a report on Comey and the FBI. It is one of the worst shots at a human being I think I've ever seen. In fact, the New York Times did an editorial that was one of the worst editorials I've ever seen about anybody. That was about Comey. You ought to go back and get, and Barr didn't use it because he didn't have the guts to use it, or something happened, I don't know. Too bad. He went to Mr. Durham. Instead of doing the Durham, all they had to use is the Horowitz report. And I always felt badly for Horowitz, frankly, because he's a Democrat, I guess. He was appointed by a Democrat. But that report has gotten lost, and it shouldn't be lost. You should all go back. It should be mandatory reading. Go back and read the Horowitz report on Comey and his cronies. And you'll see exactly, we're going to add that to all the stuff that we found. It just confirms it. But what we found is even more so. Now, we found this isn't like evidence, this is like proof, irrefutable proof that Obama was seditious, that Obama was trying to lead a coup. And it was with Hillary Clinton, with all these other people, but Obama headed it up. And, I get a kick when I hear everyone talks about people I never even heard of. It was this one. No, it was Obama. He headed it up. And it says so right in the papers. Got everything. This is the biggest scandal in the history of our country. And it really goes on to even the auto pen, because it all relates to the same thing. It all started the same sick minds. You have an auto pen, which is a tremendous, well, we don't have a president, we have an auto pen that signs everything. I'll bet you sign everything. You don't have auto pens. Everybody, who doesn't sign? You're the president of a country. But it's all that whole thing, leading right up to the end of it is the auto pen. And the auto pen was used by people, and Biden knew nothing about it. Biden knew nothing about it. They were signing documents that he knew nothing about. As an example, they released the Unselect Committee of Liability. The Unselect Committee spent 2 years grilling everybody, and then they destroyed all the evidence. You know why? Because the evidence made them guilty. And he gave them all a pardon. The Cheney, all the scum that was on the Unselect Committee, Cryan, Adam Kinzinger, and Democrats. And he gave them a pardon. Do you have something else, guys?
I was just going to add one more thing on Adam Schiff. Director Pulte reports that Adam Schiff claims he lived in a one-bedroom apartment. The house a family of four? You're a developer, a very successful developer. How's a family of four to live in a one-bedroom apartment?
No, it looks like Adam Schiff really did a bad thing. They have him. Now, let's see what happens. It's not up to me. It's not up to, I stay out of it purposely. But it's mortgage loan fraud. It's a big deal. He defrauded banks and insurance companies and the federal government. But it's very simple. It's mortgage loan fraud. And you're right. That's a lot of people to live in a one-bedroom apartment, right? But he put it down. But he has a lot of other things far worse than that. So, no, Adam Schiff, they have him 100% on mortgage fraud. Now, if there's anybody else in this room except you would have no problem. But anybody else in this room, you'd have a problem. I'd have a problem. Yeah, please.
So there was a hearing yesterday in the Harvard case. Would you allow Harvard to get their federal dollars back as a part of any agreement with the administration?
No, I'm not giving. Harvard's been given $7 billion. Can you believe it? By the $7 billion. And we want money to go to all universities, not Harvard. Harvard got more than anybody else. They have $52 billion. They get huge tax incentives and tax breaks on that $52 billion. But they have $52 billion, and they got $7 billion over a short period of time. And we have a very hostile judge appointed